us a thumbs up. Everything's going. All right, welcome. We are back in a work session talking about the budget and financial matters, and we have the Clerk Auditor's office here to start us off, so go ahead.
I have 4 packets for you guys. Which one would you like me to start with? Clerk Auditor elections, finance and audit.
What we
Clerk
have,
or
is it
tax
different
admin.
than what we already have?
No, it's the same. I just didn't know if you had a preference on which of the 4 areas I started with.
I don't care.
No, use your preference.
Okay, we'll start with tax administration. I think that one's pretty straightforward. So budget for tax administration really beyond. Do you want me to talk about our base budget or just beyond the base budget?
Both, whatever you prefer.
Okay. Base budget would be to keep things as is in that department. As you're aware, that department covers marriage licenses, passports, tax valuations, and the abatement, so indigent tax relief for, Board of Equalization. We're asking for an increase. We're not asking for any additional people in that department. We do ask for a staff reclassification and promotion for some of our seasoned staffers that have been there for quite a while and that we are now giving additional duties to. So one of the things that I wanted to clarify is if we have people that are in a classification but they're doing additional duties, then I would like to classify them for the job they're actually doing rather than the job title and job description that is outdated. So in that case, we're looking to do a reclassification and promotion. As the county has grown significantly, we have more people that are in need of disabled veterans, elderly or disabled citizens that are in need of those services. And so we would like to cross-train one of the current employees in that division to also start taking on some of those responsibilities and increase the responsibilities of the staffers in that department to be able to do
So
that.
are people not doing those functions now?
Right now, the waiting, the lines get really long. We get really backed up. During the season, we're pushing our legal statute deadlines. Sometimes we're having to work overtime to meet those deadlines. So there are people doing those functions, but we would like to have an additional person trained to do those functions as well. Also, right now, each one of our people is kind of a specialist where they do one thing. They do marriage licenses and passports, or they do Board of Equalization, or they do tax relief. We would like to cross-train people to be able to do whatever the citizen who walks into that office is, whatever they need, we want who's there to be able to serve them. That also will help us be more efficient through the process.
So if that is on their job description, then you're saying that that's gonna raise all the pay levels because they're all cross-trained and they all have that in there as a...
No, it'll be a little different. So one of the people that we're looking at, we're trying to make her a team lead because we're looking at extending hours because some of the people, specifically a lot of the people that maybe need some of this help, they're not available to come in between 8 a.m. and 4:30 p.m. Maybe they work or the people who drive them here work. And so we're trying to extend those hours a little bit. And so there will be a little bit of some people come in a little earlier, some people stay a little later, and so we're looking for some team leads to be able to do that. And this would be really to take some of those seasoned people, make them a team lead, cross-train them on everything so that we can have some of these extended hours.
Okay.
The other things are for an electronic valuation notice system. This will save us a lot of money in the long run, reducing postage and a lot of the processes that are manually done now. Frankly, just print and paper. We're trying to reduce a lot of that as well as postage costs by implementing an electronic valuation system, notice system. Also, a new customer check-in system. In the past, one of the biggest pieces of feedback that we had from people who came in to utilize those services was that there really was no waiting area. There was no check-in system. People just kind of walked in and walked past each other, on top of each other, and waited until someone came to them. Right now, we are implementing a check-in system so that when you come in the door, you check in, you mark what you're there for, and then through the check-in system, you're told what forms you need to have filled out. You have the ability to fill out those forms right there electronically, as well as any additional documentation you would need. So this process makes it, for example, if a family comes in for for passports, we know who was there first. They know exactly what paperwork they need. They can fill out as much as possible beforehand so that they can, when it is their turn, when they're up in the queue, all of that information is in the computer system. We're not retyping everything, which is what we did before. Before, everything was filled out by hand on paper and then retyped. And then also, it just expedites the process. The people in the offices that do some of these other functions, if they're in their office and they don't see that there's people in the waiting room, with an electronic check-in system, they can see that there are people in the queue, and they can come out to the waiting room, find people, bring them back to their office, and process marriage licenses or passports or Board of Equalization for them. So that's to implement that. The valuation notice print mail system, once again, this is partially a one-time system, a one-time fee, because we're looking at implementing that electronic valuation notice system. Also, IT programming requests. Once again, to create online forms, to create a lot of this so that we're not retyping information over and over again. And then we're asking for a $15,000 enterprise software solution purchase. We don't have one identified, and so that money we would ask to be put in restricted, and then if we find a system that works, we could utilize the funds at that time. If we don't find a system that works good for us, then we wouldn't utilize that money. Do you have any questions on those? Each one of those, we filled out the form about why, what's our purpose behind it, what are our goals with it, how can we function with those goals. And then at the end, I added, beyond the regular sheet, I sent this with the packet, but it's a detailed outcome. For each of my departments, I went through and put in what are our goals for this year and what are our outcomes that we expect from these funds. I'll just read through that really quickly. Detailed discussion of outcomes: improve customer convenience, basically moving to online portals, decreasing time to complete applications, increasing convenience. Improve customer service, serve the public during some weeknight and weekend hours, and improve the county efficiency. So our goals basically there are become more efficient and better serve the citizens. The next department is the general clerk functions. And you can see our outcomes and performance right there. Improve customer convenience, move marriage license process online, serve the public during some night and weekend hours because those are out of the same office as previously discussed. Do an online contract process that's using digital signatures for all of the contracts for the entire county. And we would like to become a full-service passport acceptance office as well. The money that would be spent on becoming a full-service passport office would be offset by revenues generated. So that service that we would be expanding for the public would be a fee-based service. Anyone who utilizes that service would then pay a fee, and that fee would pay back into the general fund. So those monies would come back to us. On this one, there's only 3 requests. One is a time-limited staff.
That general fund?
Yes. Marriage license and passport is general fund.
Which one's the HC? That's the tax.
That's the tax admin. So time-limited, part-time staff, basically talking about opening earlier and later for those citizens that can't get off work and be here between 8 and 4:30. We would be looking to add part-time for that. Rather than adding a full-time benefited person, we'd look to add some part-time to be open some nights and weekends. Also, the merchant account fees are due to increase just because the number of citizens we serve increase. That money does come back to us in the end, but there is a budgeted cost of of that for increased merchant fees, and also IT programming requests. Most of that is for the online marriage license portal. Once again, the fees that we charge the users of that service will come back and more than pay for that.
I appreciate the way you did this. Your department continues to be an example of exactly how to go through this process to identify outcomes. And I'm especially appreciative that your department has already achieved some outcomes this year, even before we go into next year. And so it gives a lot of confidence that when you're setting goals and you're showing how you're going to fund them, that you're actually going to achieve them. And so I'm supportive of all of these asks.
Thank you. And also, it is kind of interesting that on many of these items, we're asking for it to be in our budget, but we will have fees that more than recover the cost of them. There really wasn't a way to account for that just in our additional asks, but that's the case. So once again, I've got a detailed discussion of outcomes, and really it comes down to more efficient government, better service for our citizens in that division.
Which, again, not to harp on this, but I think you've already done it, but two, it helps more than your department.
Yeah.
Because, for example, the purchasing that I know that you and your staff have spent a lot of time on this year, that is technically under your responsibilities, and you've done a lot, but that is really streamlined the purchasing process for the entire county. And some of these objectives, it's the same way. It's your statutory responsibilities in some cases, but in other cases, it's really helping our entire county government. So, just grateful for your leadership on those issues.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We've definitely tried. With that, I'll move to the finance, audit, and purchasing function under the auditor umbrella. I'm gonna go through, spend a little bit more time on this one because it's a little bit less straightforward. Under our outcomes, increase audit output by reviewing each department every 2 years. That is not something that's been done in the past, and we talked a little bit about how I would like to do that. I would like every department to have a compliance audit every 2 years, just to make sure that we are in compliance with the minimum legal standards and everything that we need to do, particularly financially. In expertise, improve expertise of internal audit team through training and certifications. We don't have any of our auditors are certified internal auditors. Now, they have the training to be, they have the skill to be, we just simply haven't put them through that certification program, and then that's an ongoing certification that you maintain. I called my counterparts in other counties. Every one of them has at least one person, if not every person on their internal audit staff that is certified. Those certifications are more than just, pretty letters or a certificate. When you're getting those certifications, you're going through trainings that help you improve how you do your job. And when you maintain those certifications, you're doing continuing education that helps you with best practices and the latest ways to identify fraud, the latest updates in what are the legal requirements. I think that is something that is money that would be very well spent, bringing our internal audit team and having them continually learn processes and update and learn how to identify new types of fraud, especially as we move to more electronic systems. Under county efficiency, help demonstrate and find cost savings and efficiency through improvement audits. We've already helped several departments this year with that, where maybe their numbers aren't quite matching and they've found some issues. My staff, my internal auditors, are able to go through those systems objectively because they're a third party, as well as they have the skill and ability to do it a lot more quickly. So we've been helping other departments, and I would like to continue that effort. Under finance capacity, we want to increase the efficiency of the budget process and also of basically paying the bills. Right now, it's a very cumbersome process. It's a very paper process. We print roughly 10,000 pieces of paper a year to do that. We also have accountants who then have to file that paper. If we could do a lot of this digitally, it still meets retention requirements. We have the records digitally. We're just saving a lot of time and money. But that, implementing that does take a little bit of money up front. and then responsiveness to departments and proactive financial projects. One of the things that we got dinged on our S&P audit when we were rebonding was that we don't have a monthly financial overview. One of the reasons we'd like to expand the capacity in our financial department is because we would like to be able to run a financial report on a monthly basis and have that report presented to the commissioners in commission meeting. We think that's a very public forum, so it's transparent, as well as it meets the S&P requirements, and it helps all of the leaders of the county, not only commissioners, but all the departments, know exactly where their budgets are trending for the year to help us keep a better eye on how that money is being spent. And if outcomes are being met that were promised.
Let me ask you one question on this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Looking at A, you know, every department, every 2 years, and how is that gonna happen for the auditors, since the auditor and the clerk function is underneath you? I don't know how legally that well, legally is the wrong term, but it causes a conflict. And so how is
Absolutely.
that function gonna happen? When, like, for instance, we set up the purchasing this year, but we also put in there that there is gonna be a look back every single year and go down through and see if we're complying with state statute and so forth. And it would seem like if your internal auditors are going and looking at that, and then they report to you, and you have you're two-headed on this thing, that it seems like would have some problems.
Yeah, so when it comes to legal compliance, we will have to go to an outside auditor, and we've done that in the past, in order to look at the financial department's legal compliance. So we do have an outside auditing firm that does that for the finance function, because the finance function is under the auditor.
Yeah. But what about, that's financial, and we have, and James, is it James that does that? He does that anyway, right? I'm talking about, more performance on our I'm just looking at the purchasing department in specific, because we narrowly defined what that looks like. And so how are you gonna do that? James wouldn't do that.
No, so you're looking at the performance audits, not the legal compliance audits, correct? So the 2-year audit that I mentioned there, that is a legal compliance audit that I would like to do. And we have an outside auditor do that for us every year, because the budget is such an important thing. As far as performance audits go, you're right, that would be an internal thing. If we wanted to hire an outside consulting firm to do that, I would be more than happy to. In the meantime, I've been looking for and finding performance internally in my department as much as I can. If it's pointed out to me, I'm more than happy to. So if we wanted to look at adding a budget item to add a consulting firm to come in and do that, I would welcome that.
Personally, I'm comfortable with the idea that, I mean, the state audit comes in and spends most of their time focusing directly with your office.
Yes.
Our CPA, our outside external auditors spend most of their time with your department as well. On the performance audit, I'm very comfortable that with you and your department, you're going to find things. So for example, if we're trying to flag performance on purchasing of how many things slip through the cracks, I think that's something that just from an internal, that's not really a compliance issue, it's a voluntary
Absolutely.
issue, and I think every department head would have a desire to track their performance of their employees. And I've seen that desire already in your department, so I don't think that needs to be an outside agency. The formal type of audit, I would see, you know, there's some sort of conflict, but I think covered on the formal audit
Yeah,
side.
the state auditor, for the formal, the state auditor and an outside auditor both do that to make sure within legal compliance. As far as performance audits go, I do that as part of my process. Right now, we actually have an order in to purchase the Toyota Way for the employees. And the last step of any process in the Toyota Way is evaluate and look for improvements and implement improvements. In fact, if you look, when we get to the elections budget, one of my performance metrics that I've actually mentioned is to continue to improve. And I even outline how I do that. At the end of every audit, I say improve election results reporting and increase our efficiency. And I go through saying, hold an elections debrief after every election, document issues that occurred and propose solutions, update elections processes to account for lessons learned. I naturally do that in every process that I do. In the future, if we wanted an outside agency to come in, I would be completely open to that. But I do performance audits in every step of every process I do.
I think it would just be, in a matter of transparency, and the reason why you have outside agencies come in is because they're not attached, right? So it's very subjective. I am gonna be watching, this next year on our purchasing one with pretty keen eye to make sure, because we've loosened the parameters and allowed other, which I think is a good thing. It's a good thing for us to go through this process, but on the other end, I want to make sure that we're strictly in complying when we come to state law. And I want to see that audit done and performed in such a way that it gives us a real good overview and look at what's actually being done.
That's a great point. I think that as we go through and we look at auditing every department every 2 years, I would have no problem adding the purchasing department as an audit for 2020, and we could even evaluate how we did the last half of 2019 with that. Okay. I'll just go through, on finance, I'll just go through the increases. We're asking for training, testing, certification, travel for audit, finance, and purchasing. So that's training and certification across all three of those functions: internal audit, finance, and purchasing. For staff increases, this is probably our biggest ask here. It's for adding capacity in the finance and the audit functions. For finance, we're asking for a senior level accountant and what's the position called, the exact title? And then general ledger accountant, right? Yeah, so the two positions we're asking for is a general ledger accountant and a senior level accountant. We had budget manager approved, and that will help with a lot of the budget process. The main reason we want to add these other two positions, number one, is to help with these reporting features, both in the S&P audit and in the state audit. We were flagged as not having a lot of second level audits and reports being run and managed on a daily basis. One of the things I learned in my business career is what gets measured gets managed. If you're measuring something, people will focus on that. Right now, we don't have interim checks on our budget on a regular basis. A lot of department heads don't know where their budget stands year to date at any given month, and that needs to change. When that changes, so will those spending patterns. Also, in the purchasing department, towards the end of the year, we get huge requests for purchasing, and right at the end of the year, when everyone's trying to use their vacation, we're trying to buy semi-loads full of things because people see what's in their budget. If they're having a monthly check on their budget, that will help. So part of this is to continue to have that monthly check on our budget. Part of this is to have second level people entering in our books. So under the audit function and under the finance function, we don't have multiple people that do every function. That's a serious problem. That's a problem from an audit standpoint because that means there's not 3 sets of eyes on everything we do financially. Now, every audit has come back clean, but what if one of our external audits came back not clean? How could we, if we waited till the end of the year to look at that, that's going to be a problem. If we have multiple sets of eyes looking at every transaction we do, we're more likely to catch things a lot sooner. Also, when it comes to fraud, particularly government fraud, one of the best ways to prevent fraud is for people to know that multiple sets of eyes are looking at something every month, and that will deter the fraud. That's a huge part of it. Moving on from that, as a business consultant, I can't fathom having one person that can do everything, maybe 1 or 2. I'll give you an example of something that happened a little earlier. Earlier in the year, my chief deputy was at a conference in Houston on elections. Our budget officer was on vacation that she very much earned. I was having a baby, and my assistant was at another conference in Denver on auditing, and we needed a last-minute budget transfer. There was not a single person in the building who could do a budget transfer. That's a problem.
Well, it's a problem.
If norovirus were to rip through the clerk auditor's office and we had a whole bunch of people sick, if we need to be able to still function as a county. The county should not be dependent on less people than we can count on one hand in order to function. If we had needed to do a budget transfer because they had run out of food at the jail, what would we have done? If there had been a massive wildfire, what would we have done? As a business consultant, I look at that, and that's a scary thing for me. So as we look at adding these positions, there's multiple levels of it. One is we need a budget officer because we need one person who's in charge of the budget. Frankly, it's immoral for us to expect Deneen to work the amount of hours she's working and then continue to bother her when she's on vacation because we can't transfer budgets through our county. So we're at a level that we're relying on the grace of God to keep Deneen healthy, and that's not fair to her, and it's not right for the citizens of the county. So we have multiple levels here. We need a budget manager because we have to manage this process. Every department head needs to know where their budget sits on a monthly basis, but that person also needs to be able to function as the CFO of the county in case of an emergency or an interim in that position. Then we need a senior accountant because we need a second set of eyes on everything we do. Every entry in the books needs to have that second level person. And then a general ledger accountant opens up our ability to stop printing 10,000 pieces of paper every year and how much money that wastes. We actually did some estimating on these numbers for you. If you look at our outcomes, the attached addendum that I had for outcomes, if you look at that, staff time saved on filing, following up on missing documentation, scanning and forwarding information just from the auditor's office is an estimate of $110,000 a year. That more than pays for adding a senior level accountant. And that's only like I said, that's only our office. Tanner, to your point, that also means that all the other departments that we service, because when we do finance, I'm not doing finance for my department. I'm doing finance for all the departments in the county. When I do purchasing, I'm not doing purchasing for my department most of the time. I would guess that 99% of the purchases we make are not for the clerk auditor's office, they're for other departments. So when I'm estimating these numbers saved, that's just in my office. And
Can I make a point about that? It's another reason why I think that these issues that you've raised are perhaps the most critical issues facing our county right now. Deneen has done incredible work getting us ready for this process. And it is too much for one person. And I think that your leadership and your staff has really helped set an example for what your department can do and what people who already have that skill set can do with our existing tools. But I think other departments are still lagging behind because of you haven't yet invested in these systems that you're asking to invest in. And they haven't had the time to get up to speed and be as prepared and have everything available at their fingertips for this budget process. So I think that there's not a bigger priority. And that's something that has been overwhelming for our departments. It's something that has not facilitated very good communication between the commission and other departments through the budget process in the past. And so all of these issues are solving a variety of problems. And the issue of fraud is a real one, right?
Absolutely.
And just like you, I don't say that with any accusation. It's just a known fact.
yeah,
That when you have a system that doesn't have double checks and triple checks, especially to Commissioner Lee's points, when you've reduced the approval thresholds,
absolutely.
then on the back end, everyone needs to know that things are measured. It can run smoothly through the purchasing process, but we have to have that function beefed up so that taxpayers and we all know that
Yeah.
there's not a high risk of fraud.
And frankly, our accounting staff right now, they're hamsters on a wheel. They're running constantly. If they take a vacation day, all that means is that they get to work more hours to make up for it to get things done. And that's the type of environment where fraud slips through the cracks. Right? Everything's on paper. Falsifying a paper document is a lot easier, than entering it into a system that has alarms and controls when something gets changed. So I don't think that there is fraud. We went through, we've done reviews. We have good people working for us. But I don't want us to be the next docudrama about a county that, that gets taken. Galveston County lost $500 million in fraud over 10 years. I don't want us to be the next Galveston County. Most of my asks in this area deal with that. The training and testing and certification, some of that's for the auditors. The vast majority of that is for a new budget manager, is for a new senior level accountant to send them to the Government Finance Officers Association and learn their best practices, learning fraud prevention and learning performance-based budgeting like we're implementing right now. Most of that training is for that. As far as the staff increases, we talked about that. IT programming costs, that's making these paperless systems. Office equipment, that's a one-time fee. That's because we're asking for additional bodies to make things happen. The $15,000 is under time-limited staff. We would like to get a master's level accounting intern to help implement a lot of these. Instead of hiring a full-time position that may not always be needed, if we could utilize the resource we have. Brigham Young University, for example, has an amazing master's of accounting program. And if we could get a paid intern from there, we could implement a lot for just a small amount. And then the National Budget and Finance members' fees, those are organizations that will continue to teach us best practices. The last line item there, I would expect to go into restricted funds. We're looking for possible software for budget, finance, purchasing, travel, and business intelligence. We have not identified a single software system that fits our needs. But for example, we've talked about travel many times. Travel in the county is very tedious and it's very manual. When we have a manual process, we miss out on negotiated rates. We miss out on utilizing government contracts, and getting all of that documentation together takes a lot of time, as well as making all those travel arrangements take time. There's a reason that the vast majority of corporate travelers have a system that they utilize for that travel. It's because it has negotiated rates in there. It won't let people go outside the parameters that are legally allowed. If they do go outside the parameters, it sends warning notices to their supervisor and the department head. I think that implementing some of those systems would help us. Not only that, but it would save us a lot of time. Instead of somebody checking 7 different websites, we would have the ability for them to do it all in one spot with all those negotiated rates. Some of those systems will more than pay for themselves in the long run. Do you have any questions about finance, internal audit, purchasing? Okay. All right, I saved the big one for last, elections. As you know, our elections department has been the center of media scrutiny for years, dubbed the governor as the epicenter of dysfunction, and we have done an amazing job turning that around. I do have to say, I have a lot of people, when they see the turnaround, they come to me and they ask if I fired everyone in the department, and I absolutely did not. We have the same people, and we're running an amazing election with them. We have dedicated workers, we have fantastic employees, and I have been very impressed with their output. They just needed some leadership and direction, and with that, they have done more than I could have imagined. We were fortunate to be able to qualify for some grants. In the last year, we've spent $1.7 million, actually $1.75 million upgrading our elections department. Thankfully, none of that came from the general fund or from the Utah County coffers. But moving forward, the new equipment is only a piece of what we need. Our goals in this area are first and foremost, absolutely number one priority, adhere to all state and federal mandates for elections processes. Ensure that we're running safe and secure elections. And then under election security, reduce risk of fraud and error through continuous review, update of processes and procedures. Reduce the risk of fraud and cost through elections through data management. And under elections efficiency, reduce wait times at peak to less than 45 minutes, down from 6 hours in the 2018 election. release results immediately as polls close with all votes in possession by office that are valid, utilize limited space to optimize ballot flow and processing, minimize time to process each ballot, and reduce the need and use for temporary workers in the elections process. So our elections budget for 2020 is going to be a very unique budget. This one's going to be a high one because the legislature last year, they voted to have us participate in Super Tuesday. Not only is a presidential year the largest election that the elections office ever sees, but next year, instead of 2 elections, we have 3. We have a March Super Tuesday. We have to run a full election for that. We have the nominating in June, which, as you know, will be huge. We have every state office, governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, treasurer, and auditor are all up for election, as well as a hotly contested congressional district that part of which falls in our county, as well as half of our county elected officials and our state legislators. So it's going to be the biggest election that we have. The largest single increase budget item that I'm asking for of any of my 4 budgets is $565,000 for print and mail for the 2020 election cycle. That's really not an option. That is a statutory mandate. It's not a choice. This is a legal requirement. It's significantly higher than it would have been. We were given that mandate by the state legislature. We don't have an option whether or not we comply. Beyond that, service and maintenance fees for our new equipment. We did purchase just over $1 million in equipment, but maintenance fees are only $13,000. So we're grateful we got $1 million. We have to pay for that $13,000 for the service and maintenance fees. Poll worker needs, the reason this is an additional number, the reason this is an additional ask beyond previous years is because of that 3rd election cycle. We need more poll workers because we have 3 elections next year. That will not be something that we see in 2021, 2022, 2023. We'll probably see it again in 2024 if we stick with Super Tuesday. Under staff, we would like to add a full-time staffer to add a lot of the problems that happened with our elections in the past was a lack of maintenance on the back end. A lot of people think that elections happen 1 day a year or 2 days a year. Especially with the vote by mail process, an election is really, it's more like a month. We have about 2 weeks before the election. In fact, right now, as we speak, we're doing poll worker training up in the election suite. We have a month before the election and a few weeks after the election that we're getting ready for the election. But when it's not that season, we do continuous and ongoing training on all of our equipment. We do cybersecurity training. One of the biggest areas that cybersecurity, if people are looking at right now is elections. As you can imagine, there's so much talk about Russia in our elections, China in our elections. Frankly, the cybersecurity focus for the state and the nation right now is very focused on elections. So we do ongoing training throughout the year on that. I talked about...
Sorry to interrupt, just a curiosity question more than anything. The Super Tuesday, will that be a vote by mail process?
Yes.
So we'll still go through the same processes even for that?
Yeah, it'll be the same exact process. And then as we go through, because of vote by mail, it's really important that we have the most updated voter lists. On a weekly basis, we get death certificates, and we're trying to remove people from the rolls that have passed away. We have 2 major universities, and therefore we have a lot of transient population. A lot of them like to vote. We are doing voter registration at a rate significantly higher than other counties our size because of that transient population. We have specific goals tied to that. We have goals to bring our returned mail, meaning undeliverable, this voter has moved mail, down significantly. That will save us a lot of money. Adding an additional full-time person that the brunt of what they'll be doing is voter list maintenance and updating our records and ensuring that we're secure, especially through 3 elections next year and 2 elections every other year. It will more than pay for itself in saved printing and postage being mailed to people that were on the voter, that should not be on our voter rolls. Then time limited and temp needs. with 3 elections next year, our elections poll workers, some of them reach a threshold that they need to go through the time-limited employee process. That requires us to do background checks on them, and that requires us to have them as a different classification of employee, and that process costs money. So we've worked with the HR department to come up with an estimate for that. We have a freight moving company with the resources that we currently have and the new equipment that we have. It was taking upwards of a week to deliver all of the polling location equipment to all the polling locations, and then a week to bring that all back in. We would like to hire a moving company to come in, load it all in their big moving truck, and deliver it all in a day, and go and pick it up in a day. It's significantly more secure because we don't have elections machines sitting at remote locations for long periods of time, as well as it helps with liability. It's almost an insurance. We're not worried about paying workers' comp from people that have injured themselves trying to move large equipment. Instead, we're paying professionals who move large amounts of equipment on a regular basis. We have a portion for election training, membership, certification, and travel. This is kind of a front-end loaded amount. We don't have a single election center certified person working in our county. For a county of our size, that's very unusual. On top of that, the budget that I inherited coming into this office, we had a total of $200 to train our entire election staff. I called one of my counterparts in another county and asked him what his training budget was like. His is even larger than what I've asked here. His county is half the size of our county. His budget for training is larger than what I've asked for. I told him what our training budget was, and his response was, wow, that doesn't seem wise at all. Recognize that not only is that inconvenient, but it's just not wise to not have our election staff be trained. The reason I say that's front-loaded right now is because our current staff has not been trained. We need to have the ability to get everyone up to speed rather quickly. So that first year, for example, there's a conference, we're going to send 3 people to a conference where in the future we might send 1. But when we send 3 people to that conference, what we found, we sent 3 people to the IGO conference, that's the International Government Officers Conference in Houston this summer, and all 3 of them attended different presentations and then would come together and collaborate on what they had learned. So we're at the point right now where we're so undertrained that we can send 3 people to a conference, they all attend different sessions, and then come back. Then overtime costs for 2020, most of that is because we have 3 elections where we are bringing on poll workers and time limited for those. Those time limited people and the poll workers, we can't leave them in charge for supervision. So we need to have our staffers have the ability to supervise temp staff in order to ensure the security and efficiency of our elections. IT and programming needs, once again, it's just we're so outdated that this is really just bringing us up to speed. And then the next 2 items, one, we would like to utilize some services, something like Qualtrics and Salesforce to do voter communication, voter education, and also to interact with the public. I would imagine that would go into restricted funds. And if we are able to work and negotiate a good rate with the county as a whole, that would be our portion of that, working with those divisions. The last would be if additional space is afforded to our department, that would be the internal cost of that space. Every one of these is outlined in our budget request items. And like with the other packets I gave you, we have an entire section on our performance and outcomes. Elections is about 2.5 pages long of single-spaced bullets on these are our elections and these are our outcomes. We're very specific on what we want to accomplish and how we want to accomplish it. That is all I have.
Okay,
Do you have any questions?
other questions?
No more questions. Thanks for this presentation.
Not a problem.
Just, I want to thank
Yeah.
you for your hard work You've done a great job coming in. Your team's rallied around you, and echo what Tanner said. I appreciate the leading by example, especially with the, performance-based budgeting. You've done a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, let's see what time, we got another 15 minutes, 10 more minutes before the next one starts. So thank you for coming in. We'll pause and wait for the next, what lunches?
Casey, just so you know, I'm not like faking it.
It just seems like if I made it burden, if we actually pass it, then it's like, oh, okay. Burden on us to show the analysis, but if we haven't passed something. Well, but personally, we have an inspection. I don't think we have the privilege and resources to do that analysis. When we don't have. We have no, what analysis we can do it on CAT? Even though it's just a CAT, but we can do it on, okay, actually, since we passed that, Bill and I talked about X amount of cuts, so we're doing analysis now, what do you think? You know, like it just, it
Yeah,
seems
no,
like
that
a
makes
little
sense.
bit.
I literally had 20 minutes before I walked in, like, you know, from David in his office, to my office, my papers, and it's right there. So we haven't even met the process. Really, my concern, I'm fine. Still think we can do it. I'm 100% okay. I just don't think we're going to go to the department right now. Well, I'm sure that when you have David, you or David will come in. That's true.
Right, that's another way of doing, hey, here's the analysis, there's nothing to analyze.
Because we don't know what they've done from December, yeah.
Well, that was the people that I had calling me last night. That was my comment. No, no.
Yeah, they don't understand the process.
I said we set a rate every month.
It's a cap.
We set a cap for what we can spend. Because we're $20 million. And so, well, we haven't done anything as far as raising the tax rate, and then two of the people have anticipated. So you're increasing to 3%, you don't have to talk to like $5,000, increasing $10,000.
We're charging you an extra $100.
What's gonna be, and that's, I'm like, it might be an extra $100. You're on the high. You know, it could be 25, depending on what you're doing. Or less, depending on where the person goes. But again, that's my biggest concern with this. And that's exactly, I'm struggling in that place. And that's exactly the way it works. First thing that it look like, your tax bill will go up without the tax. So, which is a lot. I mean, it's not.
Here's the thing, Alpha's called their treaty taxation. They're trying to raise taxes about the same amount. Not so close. There was one person who said that.
Which is an interesting conversation because I wrote this up. Why do you not have impact rather than tax? Because what drives these positions to work is growth. So why isn't there an impact fee that will offset the cost of the reduced services?
Is that, oh, okay. There's too many
This, I know that's
distractions.
like way off topic.
That's another
I just want to know what,
Hey,
and
David.
that's why I came in, is why I brought that up.
David,
Why don't we have? an
Tanner had a
impact
good
fee?
point on the thing I talked to you about before I came down.
Hey, good.
Well, I just don't, I think that process applies once past that, once we've actually, but when we set a meeting to discuss the potential of increasing tax, there's no analysis to perform.
I think we just say it's premature.
Taxes haven't actually been raised this many years.
I think
Let's
that's
get
it.
past the legislative act. That's my concern.
Well, because there's nothing on which to have a referendum, because the resolution is.
It seems like the only is if somehow we weren't allowed to set the meeting. Right, we weren't allowed to set that back.
trying to, like you say, the resolution sets the meeting, right? But this wouldn't go on the ballot until November 2020, the meeting will already happen.
Here's,
So how do you overturn a meeting that happened?
we're talking about the technical analysis of the whole thing.
Uh-huh.
The underground and realistic analysis is not going to do it. So you make the best call and go on and get in trouble because of all that.
So if we insist on doing it, we just say there is no financial impact because it's tax.
Right. It's premature, as you say, just say it's premature. What's the word? It's not right. The issue is not right.
It's not right.
Am I standing here?
Yes.
We just need to know how to hook into the system.
We need to hook into your system, if that's okay. PowerPoint was so last year.
I heard papers, so.
Does your YouTube thing tell you how many people are watching?
I never really looked at it. See.
Do you think anybody ever actually does? Anyone actually watches it?
Yeah, they are. A lot of them are county employees.
Or most of them are county employees. Good point.
So we're ready?
Close.
I don't know how your monitors are, but pretty sure it's one. Half the stuff I couldn't read.
Mine would like start bright and then
Yeah.
it would get darker.
Yeah, I was,
The sheriff's one was really hard.
yeah, we had a graph up there. I couldn't see the axis at all. Turn around and see what where we're at. All right, Kelly, have you already pushed the button? Not quite ready.
You frozen up? You up and going?
All right, go ahead and push the button. Yep. Okay, we're now in a work session, discussing budgetary matters, and we've got the attorney's office here, so go ahead and take it away, David.
Thank you. I'd like to start, I think, just by expressing my gratitude to the three of you. It struck me as we moved into your space yesterday that it's fairly uncommon, I think, in public service to see the kind of sacrifice and the willingness that the three of you have expressed in trying to help us fill our needs, and doing so to your own, to the exclusion of your own comfort. And so thank you. I'd like to start by highlighting what our goals are. As the county attorney's office, and me specifically as the county attorney, protecting the community is probably my chief goal and my chief responsibility. Making sure that those who harm our society are in prison, making sure that those who commit offenses but are not violent people are not necessarily in jail but have a consequence, and making sure that that our system has a bit of an integrity to it in which the community can have confidence. To do that, there's a segment of the population that we need to educate with regard to what our duties are, what our responsibilities are. One of my chief aims, quite frankly, as I took office, was to make sure that county government is prepared, by way of the county attorney's office, to be the largest county by population in the state in the coming years. Much of this presentation focuses on the criminal aspect of my job. I should say almost all of this presentation focuses on my criminal aspect of the job, and I will simply say thank you to the three of you for the two additional lawyers that I have to help us with our civil side, but I will state openly now that I anticipate that my next year's budget hearing will be addressing issues relative to our civil responsibilities more than it does today. We have a criminal justice system that is completely out of balance. We resolve by way of plea bargain over 99% of our cases, which means that 99 times out of 100, as the prosecuting attorney, I don't have to prove the allegations I make because we give plea bargains. What that does is reduce our jury trials. What that does is place more power in me as the elected prosecutor and less power in juries. As I've discussed this issue with each of you and helped you to understand my concerns there, I thank you all for responding to that in your show of support in really helping to rebalance our criminal justice system. I have certain statutory duties that, quite frankly, we are not performing as an office. And we're not performing in them as an office because we lack the resources, but I'll get into that. And lastly, part of my effort as the county attorney is to refocus on how we look at crime. 80% of the people we have in our jails are not violent offenders. We jail more people in the United States than any other country in the world per capita. And to do that, to change that, we have to change what we've done. We have to redefine punishment. We have to redefine crime. We have to understand, I believe that as a society, we have had some strange intoxication with retribution to the point where we are willing to hurt ourselves as a society in the name of punishing others. And that's not the focus of this specific hearing, but it does provide an overlay for where I intend to take this office in the years to come. I want to start the formal presentation by thanking you for helping us with our staffing needs. As you know, and will recall, the 15 lawyers and the 2 legal assistants that you added to our staffing plan has allowed us to go from 240 cases per lawyer in 2018. With the addition of the 15 lawyers, we're able to go to 165 cases per lawyer. Now, the national average is still 90, but we're feeling pretty darn happy about where we are with regard to 165 cases, because I trust both the competence of the lawyers, but also the competence of the staff. And I'm not going to touch on this very much more than I already have, because from my perspective, this is a discussion we have already had and a battle that has already been waged, and we're moving on as far as I'm concerned.
One question I'd have on this, Dave, is I've been looking at this in a broader perspective. What effect do you think this has on the criminal defense that the county has to supply? Obviously, with your increased staffing, caseload shifts, where do you see this affecting public defenders?
Everything we do as a prosecution obviously affects the public defense. Now, those 15 lawyers, 2 or 3 of them will be civil lawyers, 2 or 3 of them will be screening lawyers, and so those won't affect in any measurable way the public defense. I would state that because the state of Utah is the government, because I, as the representative of the government, hold the burden of proof, that it doesn't necessarily flow that if we get one prosecutor that they then have one defense attorney. And I purposely stay out of that equation, because I don't want to be seen in any respect like we are somehow gaming our competition. We are not. But I will say that our burden is holding the burden of proof, having to prove every element of every crime beyond a reasonable doubt, does place greater burden on us and I state that with all due respect for the defense. Their job is simply different, and it doesn't necessarily follow that it's a 1-to-1 ratio. But I will give a plug that our very freedoms, yours and mine, depend on having a strong defense, whether it's public or private. But I don't necessarily believe that it's a 1-to-1 ratio.
Thank you.
Moving on, the 15 lawyers represents a $1.8 million increase to our budget. It's my belief that has been added to the staffing plan, and unless I see something different from the 3 of you, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this issue. So moving on, if you can give us our next slide there. No, it's okay. What I says, we need to put it in our budget, some faster internet. Coming back to our main screen, one of the critical functions of a jury trial system is not simply the lawyers who stay in court and who are the most visible players. Much like a quarterback and a running back are the visible players on any football team, the offensive line is critical to the success of the team. Our paralegals fill that role. We currently have 4 paralegals in our criminal division, 1 paralegal in our investigation bureau, and one paralegal in our civil. I am not seeking additional paralegals for our civil or for our investigative, but I'd like to, I am seeking more paralegals to be able to match our lawyers with our jury, with our jury trials. If we can click on the duties of our paralegals, they prepare for trials. They're the first line of defense, so to speak, to our trial team, meaning when we're in trial and we're having to prove our case, they are there to help with the coordination of technology. They are there with the presentation of exhibits. They help prepare our exhibits. They basically help every trial team in trial. They also, on our law and motion days, buffer the access that attorneys, you know, they are the buffer for our attorneys so they can focus on what's going on. And like I say, they prepare trial exhibits, they marshal the evidence, and they keep things safeguarded or secured and ready to go. If we have a goal of returning balance to our system by reducing the rate of our plea bargains from 99% to a healthier balance of trials, and you've got to recognize that we had 4 paralegals that participated in 50 jury trials last year. I do not want to create any sense that I'm seeking a quota that makes some people in my office nervous, because what we believe is that we should be charging cases and then not resolving them simply for the sake of time savings. We should be resolving them only if we don't feel like we can prove our case. But right now we have 50 jury trials a year, roughly, which is 1% of our caseload, and we have 4 of those paralegals handling 50 jury trials. If, for example, we were to increase the scope of our, which we will do, we will have more jury trials in 2020. If we went from 1% jury trials to upwards of 10% jury trials, that's an increase from 50 jury trials to 500 jury trials, and you can see what that does to our capacity to prepare for those trials. Now, the number of trials that a paralegal will do per paralegal will increase dramatically, but to make that work in more jury trials, we simply have to have the staff with them, because you know, this is not like a television movie where the lawyer just goes to court and by himself. There's a tremendous amount of preparation and staff behind that scene, which is why we're asking for 6 additional paralegals. We have 4 in our criminal division right now, and I'm trying to put 5 more of those in our criminal court, so that every trial court judge, every trial court has a team of 3 lawyers, which you've already given us, 1 paralegal, and a victim coordinator, which I'll get to, but also a paralegal. The 6th paralegal, I'm asking for as an administrative paralegal to help what has really never occurred in most criminal justice offices, and that is the accurate and healthy record keeping of statistics. As we have gotten into the statistics of criminal justice, it's alarming to see where we are dropping the ball, and you really can't know where you're dropping the ball until you start reading those statistics. And so I'm seeking a paralegal to add to our administrative team, which incidentally we had one. The previous administration had a paralegal on its administrative team. That paralegal was reassigned to help us with our victim coordinators, our victim and our witness coordinating.
So my numbers are different. I have on here 4 paralegals at 360 on the additional budget request.
That's what it says. 4 paralegals at 360. That's probably a mistake on our part, frankly, because we were probably counting the civil and the investigative and lumping them in at the criminal. And so, yeah, I mean, our formal request is actually 2 paralegals more than what that says.
You have that number, so it'd be 6 paralegals at what?
Well, 6 paralegal, 4 divided by 360 is what, 90,000 a paralegal, so times 180,000, so I was never really a math boy on my feet, but I'm going to say that that's probably $540,000. Is that what you say, Larry? $540,000. Any other questions on paralegals? Now, I will tell you that we have the best practices policy with regard to attorneys, going from the 200 and some odd down to 165. That's not enumerated in statute any place, nor is, it's just simply a best practice by the American Bar Association. I have no data to say what the best practices are for paralegals with regard to trial preparation. All I can say is that I have four paralegals who have been handling 50, and now we're going to dramatically increase that, and so it's going to tax those resources. I would also say that in our most difficult cases right now, that's our death penalty case, we have paralegals assigned full-time for that as well because of the added burden that causes.
I guess one comment on the paralegals is, and I know you're going to staff your office how you see fit. I know it is interesting that the state of Utah, the Utah Bar Association, is leading in some ways on a national level the modernization of regulation of the legal profession and allowing paralegals to do some activity that was previously classified as unauthorized practice of law. And I think that's mostly in the civil and the private practice context, and it's a way to bring down the cost of legal services to our society. But I think it's an interesting application
It is.
in your office as well.
It is, and the reality is that the reality is that there's a lot of things that our lawyers do that paralegals could do if they were allowed by law to do it. Now, and I suspect that the bar will hopefully catch up with that. That brought something up to my mind of Commissioner Ivey, if I can go back to your question on public defenders. The other thing that's also important to distinguish is that not every criminal case belongs to the public defenders. Every criminal case does belong to the prosecutors. And so there's a segment of our population, hopefully a greater segment than would like it to be, but there's a good number of cases that are not public defense in nature, to answer that question. Okay, moving on. With our investigators, currently we have 5 investigators and we have 1 bureau chief. And historically, the investigations unit has had 3 primary functions. Number 1, to serve as a specialized investigation unit for other law enforcement agencies that needed additional resources, telephone, high-tech sorts of a lab sort of thing where we could engage in kind of higher-end investigation. For reasons that I'm not familiar with, much of that function was shifted from the county attorney's office to the sheriff's office a few years ago. We believe that is an appropriate place for the county attorney's investigation bureau, because we service and serve all 23 law enforcement agencies in the county, and we believe that that's an appropriate place for that. But in addition to that responsibility, the county attorney's office has dealt with primarily, we have been the clearinghouse by and large for the investigation of white collar crime. And, and, again, for reasons that I cannot justify, other than to say we have been too busy to do anything else, the threshold for taking and investigating and taking any kind of white-collar case into the county attorney's office has been a threshold of $100,000. So if you lose $85,000 in a scam, we're not going to investigate it. I think that's wrong. I think it needs to be dramatically reduced down to something that serves the average member of the community, because most members of the community are going to be devastated if they lose $5,000.
Right.
And so that's something that we have to get a handle on, and we have to be able to have the human resource to be able to provide those white-collar investigative
So
needs.
David, I do have a
Yeah.
question in regards to like your investigators and the digital forensic specialist. What type of equipment sharing can we do? Because obviously, some of these positions are gonna need some sophisticated pieces of equipment to effectively do their job. Are we gonna need to double up on that type of equipment? If, you know, the sheriff's department's, you know, gonna need a digital scanner or whatever it might be, and is your investigator gonna need that same type of equipment? Or are we talking about different equipment, or will we be able to have it in a central location and each of you can check it out as needed? What accompanies those positions for specialized equipment to do their job effectively?
Well, as a general answer, I'll say this, that's going to be dependent upon the technology, right? And now we're referring specifically to the lab. For example, every highway patrolman has a radar gun in his or her patrol car. Not every highway patrolman has some specialized scale for an 18-wheeler, for example. And how that works specifically, I have to confess that, you know, we're not in the weeds of that at this point, because really what we are looking to do is capture more human resource rather than technology. We added a Celebrite software component to be able to grab the technology from phones. That's what, you know, we're trying to convert one of our sergeant's positions to a digital forensic expert specialist. That's what that is, but we haven't included in our budget, I don't believe, correct me if I'm wrong, any other really specific specialized equipment. So that would probably a future discussion to have. Right now, what I'm trying to simply do is find the human resource so that we can bone up on our white-collar investigations, also so that we can continue to be the lead agency for officer-involved shootings and internal affairs investigations of local police, and also so that we can deal with areas that, quite frankly, we need to reframe in our culture and do a better job prosecuting. For example, these, you've heard me mention many, many times before, crimes against custodial parents who are whose non-custodial, whose former spouse is more than $10,000 in arrears in child support. Now, we look at that as a society and we say, well, you know, the ex-spouse isn't paying child support. Well, if we look at it as it really is and said, you know, the ex-spouse has just stolen more than $10,000 from the custodial spouse, we may look at that differently, because we have significant societal problems that are occurring because of our inability to, or just our lack of enforcement of that one statute. Crimes against children. Now, my agency, my investigations bureau serves as a resource to smaller agencies for crimes against children. You know, whether it be an online sort of chatting risk where someone's trying to have where some predator is trying to have sexual relationships with a 12 or 13-year-old boy or girl, or whether it's something of a different nature, those crimes are happening every day. And while we are not the front line necessarily for that, we simply need to be a resource for those who don't have the expertise in some of the smaller agencies. And so, move on
So
there.
David, before you move off, so I asked the sheriff's department about, I said, it seems like we've got a double up going on. It used to be that the lab and everything was in the attorney's office, and then I don't know, a couple of years ago, whatever it was moved to the sheriff's department. Now it looks like it's a rebuild back into the attorney's office. And so my question will always be, where's the appropriate place for it? Is there some statutory responsibility to be in one place or the other, or is it a preference? Where should it be? Or should it be in both?
I don't think that there's a statutory requirement that it be in either place. I think what it is, from my perspective, is where does it make the most common sense to have it be? In the agency that serves all 23 police agencies as they're both a resource and the prosecution arm, or in the county sheriff's office, who is essentially, as the elected sheriff, he is essentially the chief, the police chief over the unincorporated areas, and also the leader of the jail. To me, it just makes more sense that function occur at the county attorney's office. But if it's at the sheriff's office, then we have every desire to be cooperative and working together. And if it's at the county attorney's office, then our doors are open. This is not a turf question. This is just what serves the public the best.
Right, and I think doubling up and having two, one in the attorney's office and then also one in the sheriff's department, doesn't serve the public well, because now we're getting two of the same in essence, and so in some form or another, we're gonna have to
Right.
weigh
I
in
mean,
on that question.
I would agree with you generally and disagree with you generally as well. It depends on the, if it's an automobile, then, who has the family car today is, not the question. If it's a very high-tech piece of equipment, then I agree with you completely.
I would love to see, for me personally, to help us kind of work through that, and into my earlier question, like, what percentage of the crimes that your office is investigating are coming from municipalities, are coming from, the joint task force that we have with the sheriff's department, and how many are coming from the sheriff's department? Tying into your
I'm
family
going to-
car situation, right? We're gonna call it mom's car if mom drives it 80% of the time, and dad's in at 10 and the kid's in at 10, right?
Right.
And so for me, it would be interesting to know, of the investigations your office is doing, where are those crimes coming from as a percentage? Municipalities, joint
Right.
efforts,
I'm-
or from the sheriff's
I'm
department?
going to hazard a guess here, and I'm going to put Haley on the spot. I believe that anecdotally, I may be able to give you some answers to that before the end of this hearing. If we can we get into just where and say cases that were referred to our office by police agency? Let's do that. Let's just have somebody, run that, whether it be Tim or Chad or somebody else. And then if you'll text that to me, don't leave, because I might need you for something else. Why don't you text it up to them? Okay,
That's good,
Yeah.
thank you.
thank you. Also, just to follow up on your question, sometimes we're not the only prosecuting agency. You take the task force, for example. We have one lawyer embedded with the task force, but sometimes those cases go federally as well. So, what I'm about to give you probably won't be entirely.
It gives me,
Give you a
again, what
general
I'm
idea.
after here is just some kind of information to go, well, it makes the most sense to have it housed in this department. And when we're looking at purchasing this type of equipment, this highly specialized equipment,
Right.
it makes sense for it to fall within these, within this department's budget.
I agree. thank you, okay.
And that's what I'm after there with that kind of information, as to where it makes the most sense for this money to be allocated.
Hopefully within the next 25 minutes, I'll get you some information on that. Okay. Sexual assault is something that is investigated by local police agencies. It's something that the statistics, not only statewide but nationwide, are quite alarming. The number of people who are sexually assaulted who have a forensic exam conducted and who ask for prosecution, that the matter be prosecuted. Many of those cases go unprosecuted, and it's a question of education between my office and law enforcement to be able to identify the cases that more readily could come to my office for prosecution. Let's move on here. I've discussed already financial crimes. You know, last year in Utah County, there are 3,700 reports of financial fraud across Utah County law enforcement databases. Now, you know, many of those are people who have been defrauded by people in Nigeria, so to speak. Those will never be investigated. They'll never be prosecuted. They'll never be resolved in that respect. But I feel an obligation and want to use and intend to use my investigative bureau to provide education to the residents of our community as to how to avoid these sorts of scams. Because again, it devastates lives. I think every one of us in this room probably knows someone who has fallen for that kind of scheme, and it typically occurs to people who can least afford it. I have stated many times publicly that it is easier to steal $10,000 in Utah County than it is a Snickers bar from 7-Eleven. Because the kind of white-collar crime, the sophisticated kind of crime that we're talking about simply is under the radar. And so what I'm trying to do is add some investigative help to be able to lower, well, I'm going to lower the threshold. I just need to be able to have the human resource to make it so that it's effective. I've also touched on criminal law support. If you owe $10,000 or more in child support, you're committing a felony. Office of Recovery Services is the agency that assists in much of that, but in reality, the Office of Recovery Services, their interest primarily is to recover government monies. So, you know, dad is on food stamps and mom owes child support, or vice versa, and because mom or dad is receiving public assistance, then the state will go after the non-custodial parent for the reimbursement of those public funds. That's primarily where they spend their efforts, and I dare say there are thousands of men and women who are owed large amounts of child support, and it's just simply not being handled in society. No one is taking up that burden. We intend to do that. Let's move on. Here's the problem. Besides the obvious problem of homicide, that you know, lives are taken and other lives that remain are shattered, and that is, you can never predict when this is going to occur. And you've helped us tremendously with our lawyers, but the reality is that with we're talking about investigations. When we get our homicide cases are our most complex and difficult cases to try and to prove, and so our policy is now to devote an investigative resource to every homicide. Now, we have one death penalty case right now. There's another potential death penalty case, which this is not serving as an announcement for that, but it's certainly on the table as potential. We, as you know, had the retirement of Scott Finch as our investigative bureau chief. I appointed Patty Johnston to be the investigative bureau chief. That position, filling Patty Johnston's position, we have just filled, but that person was assigned immediately to our death penalty case and will work full-time on putting together the evidentiary basis for that case. And so in reality, while we're asking for what we're asking for, we're really down one person, which is why we just need help with investigations. Go ahead. Coming back to the main screen here, this is what troubles me and keeps me awake at night, I have to say, among the most. If you can picture yourself as a victim of crime, something bad happens to you and your case is now being prosecuted and it's in the county attorney's office, you're going to want to know the status of your case. Now, despite the fact that that's our legal requirement, you're going to want to know what's going on with your case. And we have victim witness coordinators, and their role is not only for victims but also for witnesses. And that's critical because there's always more witnesses than there are victims, but they do both. Their role is to make the initial contact, to help shepherd and guide the victim and the witness through a preliminary hearing, to attend the motions hearing, and to contact, make sure that every victim understands what's happening in court, and to help make sure that the victim and the witnesses are able to attend the trial. We also have a statutory responsibility to provide to help them with their restitution services, to help them be paid back, and it's a daunting task. If you look at a bare minimum, our victim witness coordinators should speak with every victim 5 times. We have 4,000 victims per year, and we have 3 victim coordinators, 1,333 victims per coordinator. If you followed that 5 times contact, that's 20,000 phone calls simply on making phone calls for victims. What's reported in our stats for our VOCA grant is 7,500, but that is so much fewer than what we have to have. And this is, Larry, is this the number that we actually spend, or is this that we're supposed to be spending?
No, that's in the that's
That we've spent 4,000 hours. Right. Okay. So it's a big job. What else do what else do our coordinators do? Well, they interview our victims, and they interview our witnesses. They make travel arrangements when our witnesses live out of state. They have to sit in court with our victims. They arrange for the witness fees, and again, they are statutory obligated to provide restitution services and helping them have their restitution made. And so the question is, what is our need? Now, I want to distinguish that between our need and our ask. Okay, our need, we have 3 currently. What we really need is we need 15 more, which we're not asking for, but we need a total of 18 victim witness coordinators if we were going to put 2 in every court, which would make it manageable. Look at the statutory language of what, and before I get into this, let me say this statutory language not only obligates me as a county attorney, but it obligates you as a county commission. My job is to provide the services. Your job is to provide the funding so that I can provide the services. Now, I'm happy to be the cheerleader on this issue at the state legislature because I think it's completely wrong that counties are saddled with these burdens. I think it should be the state of Utah that pays these burdens. Nevertheless, we have the duty. For example, we have, victims have a right to be informed as to the level of protection from intimidation and harm available to them and from what sources they can participate as they participate in the criminal justice proceedings. This simply is not occurring right now. We do not have the resources. Victims and witnesses, including children, have a right to be informed and assistant as to their role in the criminal justice process. That's a duty we have. Next. Victim and witnesses have a right to clear explanations regarding relevant legal proceedings. That right there alone is a 15 or 20-minute conversation with a victim. That's our duty. Victims and witnesses have a duty that we have a secure waiting area. I'm not so concerned about that. We can provide that when necessary. Let's move on to the next one. Victims may seek restitution or restoration or reparation. State and local governments that serve victims have the duty to have a functional knowledge and procedures established by the Crime Victim Reparation Board and to inform victims of these procedures. I've mentioned that's simply not occurring. I will go to the point of saying if we actually prosecute an embezzlement case, we likely won't even call the victim because we are just so overloaded with that. If victims and witnesses have a right, they have a right to have their personal property returned, and we have an obligation to help them with that. Moving on. Victims and witnesses have the right to reasonable employer intercession services, including pursuing employer cooperation and minimizing their employees' loss of pay and other benefits. If you can imagine the nightmare that is in dealing with 4,000 victims, potentially. Moving forward. Victims and witnesses, particularly children, should have a speedy disposition of the entire criminal justice process. That's probably, something that is not going to be solved in this budget year. Victims and witnesses have the right to timely notice of judicial proceedings that they are to attend and timely notice of cancellation of any proceedings. That's significant because it's one thing to call them or email them and say you have to be at court on the 17th of January at 4 p.m. It's another thing altogether to say, I'm sorry, that court appearance just got canceled. Most preliminary hearings or hearings that require their attendance will be scheduled and rescheduled 3 or 4 times for one reason or another. So I've told you what our need is. What are we asking for? We have 3. We're asking, as you know, for 6 more. So we want to get a total of 9. Why 9? Because we want to put 1 victim coordinator in every court so that we have a team of 3 lawyers, 1 legal assistant, 1 paralegal, 1 victim coordinator. If we can do that, we will take out we'll take a chunk out of our non-compliant obligation. Quite frankly, we won't get there, but we have a duty to these victims, and if I can address something else, if we can go with that, hit that overtime thing right there. We have a bit of a problem, and you'll understand completely what I say when I say it's a brewing URS problem. The county attorney's office does not pay overtime, despite the fact that we are legally obligated to pay overtime. We have, as paralegals through the third quarter, our paralegals were overtime 117, almost 118 hours. Our victim coordinators, 223 hours. Our investigators are overtime by 90 hours. You add that up, that's in this year alone, roughly $100,000 to $120,000 in money that we should be paying. And what we do is we say, well, if you spent 55 hours last week at a trial, then we want you to stay home for 35 hours, or stay home 15 hours so that you can balance that out. what that results in is, you know, the work not getting done because we're trying to comply with our requirement not to have, we're trying to manage our overtime. But we're managing it in a way, we're trying to manage it in a way that's responsible. But because we don't pay overtime, we are at risk. We're fortunate that no one in the county attorney's office has said, where's my 223 hours of overtime for which I should be paid? Because we cannot legally say we're gonna pay you by the hour, but we're not gonna pay you overtime. And I think that, you know, most of these positions are positions that are paid by the hour. So that's something that I commend to you as something that is a problem that we need to fix. We're doing our best with our management of that, but
David, can I ask one question on this?
Please.
The sheriff was asking for additional funding for victim advocates,
Mhm.
and I asked him the same question that I'll ask you. What crossover do you see between those roles of victim coordinator and victim advocate in the sheriff's
there is
department?
no crossover. Let's say that crime happens to you, and the investigating agency, whether it be the Provo Police Department or the Sheriff's Department, they have a victim's advocate who will help you through that process. We don't have victim advocates, we have victim coordinators, victim and witness coordinators, because once that case leaves the sheriff's office and comes to our office, then our role is not to advocate for the victim. Our role is to coordinate what occurs to that victim and with that witness. And so, you know, while they have the same name in their job title, they're different, and from my perspective, have no real.
A question I'd have then, does the advocate from the sheriff's department stay with them through the whole process, including the court?
I don't believe so. Haley? Does the advocate from the sheriff's office stay with the victim through the court process?
I would just question why that's not the case, especially when we're dealing with instances of malicious crimes like rape or the sexual abuse of a child. It seems like if that victim was establishing a relationship early with the initial advocate, that it would be advantageous for that individual to carry them through the whole process.
I wholeheartedly agree.
And so I'd just be curious as to, you know, why that's structured the way it is, or if it would be worth looking at in those type of instances. I mean, I get it if maybe I was robbed, you know, I mean, there's some emotional trauma that occurs there because you feel violated and threatened because someone broke into your home, but I think it's significantly different than in the case of rape or incest or abuse of a child, to where that advocate, you would have established that relationship of trust for them to carry you through the whole process, through your therapy and treatment and you know, to finalization of your court proceedings.
I wholeheartely agree, and the problem is, I'm not sure how you fix the problem, because, it's many times worse than having your seventh doctor come into your hospital room and say, can you please describe your symptoms for me?
Right.
There's a lack of coordination that occurs, and I'll tell you that the simple answer is that when the sheriff's office, for example, passes off that person to us, you know, they'll cycle back and pick up another victim, right? Well, if in an ideal world, you know, that person wouldn't cycle back, but that person would flow through both things. It's a great idea. It's a great concept. I've spent no time focusing on it.
Okay. The other question I'd have, do you have the figures, if we fund all of your positions requested, particularly with your overtime areas, do you have an estimate of where those overtime numbers would be down to? So if we get you your 15 victim witnesses, coordinators, you know, we're gonna drop from 223 overtime hours to 50 to 10.
Well,
Do we have a projection on what that looks like?
I view this right here as a separate issue, and let me explain why. I view this as a management failure on my part.
Okay.
Since I have no budget for overtime, I should be making sure that my people don't work more than 40 hours a week. That's on me. What that will mean is that fewer people will be served. And so those numbers should be zero, irrespective of you filling my budget needs or not. My point, that's an important point to make, because I'm not asking for more people so that I can bring these numbers to zero. I should bring these numbers to zero, whether I have one victim coordinator or 20 victim coordinators.
Okay.
Did you find out anything? Okay.
And you can, I mean, on that, if you're done, we can
Okay.
email it or something. Again, that's, to me, when we're talking about these things, I wanna make sure we, we deal with them.
Right. Looking at the overall, I'm not spending a lot of time on the 15 new lawyers, except to say thank you, thank you, thank you. The same with the 2 legal assistants. The digital forensic specialist is a reclassification of 1 sergeant, and so it's diminishing 1 sergeant and adding 1 area there. So that's not a huge shift. We are asking for additional paralegals, additional investigators, and the witness coordinators. When it comes to the professional legal services and expert witnesses, those are for the death penalty cases, or case and potentially cases. That's a number that we don't really know what it's going to be.
Given the significant financial challenge of those death penalty cases, and what seems to be a growing appetite to move away from the death penalty in Utah, where do you think we're at with that? I mean, is it realistic to see an end to the death penalty in Utah? Or is this an area of pressing budgetary need?
I am personally not a proponent of the death penalty. However, I am a huge proponent that the decision of that should be made by a jury. I am more committed to restoring our jury system than I am about making a statement for or against the death penalty. And so, if you're asking for my opinion, I'll give you my opinion. I believe that 8 or 10 years, maybe 5 years, there will be no death penalty in Utah. Having said that, I believe that it is my responsibility as the prosecuting attorney, if the gateway threshold is met, to allow the jury to decide that question. Which again poses.
It's expensive.
Yeah, and here's the irony. You have 2 young, innocent victims. One was a resident of Tooele County, one is a resident of Juab County. You have a person charged with that crime who's a resident of Juab County. All of the contact that took place between those 3 took place in Juab County. With respect for where he allegedly crossed the border 1 mile into Utah County to commit a crime that's not illegal pursuant to county ordinance, but illegal to state law, and then that act by a criminal now is saddling 3 public servants with how do we pay for that act. Had it occurred a mile off into Juab County, this wouldn't be an issue. That's why I really believe that criminal justice reform has got to include the question of who pays for it.
In fairness, we're gonna hear in just a second, we're paying for it twice.
You are.
Because we're paying you and we're paying the public defender.
That's right.
And so we're on both sides of that.
It is an act of sheer irresponsibility on the part of the state of Utah to saddle counties with that. And this is a county that can financially, with 700,000 residents, absorb that much better than a county like Juab with 15,000 residents. I mean, it really is the death penalty lottery that can almost bankrupt a county overnight if the wrong crime gets committed in the wrong place at the wrong time. Any other questions?
So, as I've gone through this, and as you're well aware, the first two, we've worked down through, and it's one that I could go forward with. There might be some modifications that we have to do there. The second two with the digital forensic specialist experts and those 3 sergeants, I think we need to find a place and determine where that place is, so that we're not doubling up. I think that needs to be something that we take care of. The ones underneath that, the paralegals, the victim witness coordinators and so forth, I'm not supportive of those in this budget cycle. And then with the professional legal service expert witness, I'd like to take that down to $100,000, because we just don't know, and we don't know if it's gonna go over years, multiple years, or whatever the case may be, but at least it gives us an opportunity. And then with the overtime in investigations, I feel like that one can be absorbed in a budget.
I
That
agree.
you can manage that one.
I agree with that one, and if I can address, and I'm not going to address the paralegal issue. I will address the victim coordinator issue. I have a statutory obligation that I can either comply with in a haphazard and subpar way, like we're doing now, or I have a statutory obligation that I can make a good faith attempt at complying with for all victims. Or it's not all, let me say that differently. As it currently stands, I can give a lot of people some services. I can give all the services that I'm statutorily mandated to give only to a relative few. I believe that my duty to provide those services doesn't fully, I mean, it's contingent completely on your duty to give me the money to do that. And I'm not here to say you should cut from here or there or anywhere. I'm not here to say you should raise taxes. I'm not here to say anything about that. What I am here to say is that you and I share the same duty to those innocent victims that we each have an obligation towards. And so I would push back a little bit and simply say, the people who are victimized the most and the people who are victimized the greatest are those who have the least voice and are those who are most helpless among us. They are the ones, if I can just use some graphic language, those are the ones being screwed in our criminal justice system because they do not have the funding that they need. And this is like a safety deposit box. Their services depends upon my willingness to put my key in and serve them, and your willingness to put your key in and fund them however you need to.
I know we've got our next one waiting, so.
Yeah.
Anything else? Okay. I'll get those numbers to you. Nothing yet? Oh, do you get them to me? I think that, let me see here.
And if you want to email them, that's fine.
Let me just quickly look, because I don't want to have sent. Doesn't look like, I will tell you this, the Celebrite that you funded for us, we've utilized 32 times on 32 phones in the last 21 days. So, thanks. Nothing on the agencies, right? Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think what they said was wrong.
Hi, Lauren, how you doing?
Oh, is it nap time yet? David needs to have Ezra just said this, David needs a job as like a jazz radio host. He just, a job as like a jazz radio host, his voice could kind of just,
Apparently don't have.
Are you ready
Must- I
for a
must have
break,
missed
or
it,
you
but I
wanna
don't.
forge ahead?
We'll forge ahead and, thanks, Tom, for being here. Public defenders. Go ahead. Oh, have you already pushed the button?
Pardon me?
Oh, wait, she's gonna push the button and we'll start all over. I thought we were just rolling.
I said those comments.
Okay, now we're still in a work session, meeting, and we've got the public defenders here. Tom, go ahead.
Thank you. I could approach.
True attorney. Yes, you may approach.
I don't do it much.
Approach with caution.
Thanks, Tom.
You're making me wish I had a gavel or a robe or something.
Yeah, there's one right there.
I think it's best to just go forward with my request right off the bat, and that is the top few rows indicate the expenses I project for next year and what the projected funding would be to cover those expenses. And what I'm asking for is 7 new attorney positions, 2 social workers, 2 support staff, and I was advised that the commission as a group thinks it's appropriate that we have a financial manager in my office. I actually agree with you on that point. I've been doing it. I've been doing it for 20 years. I feel capable in doing it, but I think that there needs to be another set of eyes. And I think that's a great suggestion.
Was that 12 total? Is that what I'm counting?
Pardon me?
That 12 total? Is that what I'm counting?
I'm not understanding.
That 12, is that 12 total?
Total
7 attorneys,
positions?
2 support staff, 2.
Yes, yes.
There was 2 others. What was it? What was the 2 others?
2
Support staff?
social workers, 2 support staff. 7 attorney positions and the financial manager. Yes, that 5 new people, or 12 new people. Let me explain the reason for 7 attorneys. We've had a new law that requires that in every juvenile delinquency, there be an attorney appointed, even the minor, less serious matters, those that go before a judge. They're not terribly complicated, but by the numbers, it takes at least 1 attorney to cover. We have 5 different juvenile courts. 3 are in our brand new building. 1 attorney, or 1 judge rather, sits in American Fork, 1 in Spanish Fork. It's just not possible that 1 attorney can cover all 5 courts, as each of the judges has their own individual calendar. The state funded 1 attorney to help us with that. We're asking for another attorney. The way that we want to do that is we want to bring one of our stronger attorneys from our district court team and place him in the juvenile court as a team leader, both in partly in delinquency cases and partly in family cases or DCFS cases. We're asking for an attorney to replace the position he would leave in our district court team. We also want to have another attorney in our appellate division. As you hopefully are aware by the time that many times that I've appeared before you, one of the responsibilities our office has that the county attorney does not have is we're responsible to prosecute all appeals that go before the Utah Court of Appeals and the Utah Supreme Court. And that is funded strictly in our office. We need another attorney handling those duties. We want to similarly take one of our stronger writers out of our existing staff of district court attorneys and place that person in the appeals division doing appeals. We want to replace that person. Our trial staff goes to 5 different calendars a week in the district court. It's not 5 days a week. It's not Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. It happens to be 2 different assignments on Tuesday, one in American Fork and the other in Provo. So to make a comprehensive increase that would make sense to lessen the caseload across the board for the entire office, we would ask that there be an attorney position in each one of those assignments, 5 assignments weekly. So that would be 5 going to the trial courts, 1 additional attorney doing delinquencies in the juvenile court and then being replaced, and 1 attorney moving into appeals and being replaced, and that's how we get to 7. As to the social worker, I brought some studies. As you might be aware, the state funded 1 social worker to aid in our representation in the juvenile courts. We had 1 start at the first of the year last year, in January 1, and then another came on board on June 30th or July 1, their fiscal year. And if I could share these with you, each of you. A study was done of our social workers. That I just gave you was a presentation that one of my colleagues made to, I'm not sure who the presentation was to, but it was a PowerPoint presentation. A couple of things I'd like to point out to you. I think it's on page 5. It indicates that it resulted in a 4-month reduction in foster care for children placed in foster care when there was a social worker appointed to a case, as opposed to social worker not being involved in the case. Now that savings has been a savings to the state and would not be reflected in your budget or my budget. But I use that as an example. In the next page,
Well, it sounds like the state would be happy in funding this then.
yeah, they have, and they have. This is the social worker
Talk about
that
the 2 new
has been
social workers.
working in the juvenile court, and you're on to me. I'm using that as an example of why I believe it would be cost effective to have social workers working in our, what I call the adult court, for the same reason. I believe we can cut down on incarceration time from a couple of different angles. First of all, in any given case, if we can get a social worker involved with a given defendant, as you're probably aware, most of the people we represent have substance abuse problems, mental health problems, relationship problems that continue, that are chronic. If we can get social workers involved up front in the case, get them into the type of treatment, the type of help that they need, we can help them in that individual case. Hopefully keep them out of jail pre-trial, because we can convince courts that we have a plan in place that are addressing whatever their problems in life are, and possibly post-trial, having corrected behaviors and not making it necessary to just warehouse people and do nothing but punish them. Long range, if we can get these same people on the road to correcting their behaviors, perhaps they're not coming back time and time and time again. Another aspect of our and our business is repetitive offenders. Many people coming through the system over and over and over again, facing the same problems. People with problems with relationships and violations of protective orders, drug problems, mental health problems. Hopefully, the model that we've used in the juvenile court can be replicated in the adult court. I believe that it's, I think it's sound reasoning that it would work.
I appreciate that, Tom, especially because in reading through this, I think it's very consistent with the models we've seen throughout the nation where we invest in these type of programs that significantly reduce recidivism rates. They keep people out of jail, so we're housing them less, and in the long run, save us significant amounts of dollars that don't even calculate the fact that we are, as this study found, creating more cohesive families and as a result, making these people back into productive citizens who are contributing to taxes in society rather than being a burden. And so it's really cost effective from a management standpoint when we invest in these things that have got some data showing that this helps us save money.
I agree, obviously. I was thinking as I was walking over here, in the 20 years that I've been doing this, I've participated in 2 different studies where your predecessors have attempted to create a pretrial services, something like what they do in the 3rd District in Salt Lake, where everyone who comes into the system is screened to try to keep them out of jail pretrial and get them out and working with treatment. The sheriff is heavily involved. The proposals that we looked at previously, the sheriff here was heavily involved, and we could never quite get it off the ground because of the extreme cost in personnel and managing it. I think that this is a similar program using the resources in the community and hopefully a couple of social workers that do that screening up front and get people to the right places and kind of create a less expensive pretrial services than we've looked at in the past. I think it's worth a try. And I think, as Commissioner Ivey has said, I think it has benefits short-term and long-term.
So, I mean, I agree. I think that these programs, and especially with looking at diversion programs before, instead of going into the jail, and then trying to pick their lives up after they've been through that process, are very advantageous. Who supplies the social workers for the youth, the juveniles then? Who does that right now?
Well, we have, as I said, we have 2 on. They are just privately retained. They're paid from our salary, paid a salary from our budget,
The
which
juveniles
the
right
state has
now?
funded. Pardon me?
And the state's,
Yes.
okay, so the state's paying for this one here that you say is the.
Yes.
And now we're looking at 2 additional ones for adult.
Or what I call the adult court, yeah. And as I said, the effectiveness in the juvenile court is getting parents up and running when they've had problems with their parenting skills, getting children out of foster care, saving the state money in foster care expenses.
Sure.
And I'm hoping and suggesting that that model can be replicated in the adult court, keeping people out of jail. Both
So why
before-
wouldn't the state then fund these two social workers? I guess I'm coming back to that.
They do. They do. And I'm not asking that they be funded by you.
Oh,
The state already has funded them.
for the adult
They've been,
ones.
yes, they've been, I'm sorry, let's make sure we're on the same page. The state has funded the 2 social workers that are presently working in the juvenile
Oh,
court.
yes. But now you're asking for 2 more social workers,
Right.
and the state is gonna fund them?
No. No, and that is a factor of the budget that I've requested of the commission. Is the 2 social workers and 2 support people that just work in our office, in addition to the attorney and the financial manager. Let me what I gave you, as I said, what I gave you was a PowerPoint presentation that summarizes the report. Let me give you the full report that was prepared by the, I believe, the Department of Social Work at the U of U, that specifically addressed the effectiveness of the social worker that's working in our system. I should say that the salaries, the proposed salaries for both the social worker and the financial manager, I have taken from some advice from both Richard Nance, who you certainly are aware of, who has many people of similar nature working in his office, and also Mr. Barnes, who shared some data with me to set a salary rate. So I believe that the salary rates are probably well thought out and within ranges that, well, both Mr. Nance and Mr. Barnes believe are appropriate. You
Tom,
perhaps,
do you have any data on the number of individuals that have been represented, the outcomes of cases, or just metrics of that level of the work that's been done by your office?
the data that I have that I could give you would be the caseloads that we have had over the years, the caseloads or the cases that have been filed by the county attorney, orders to show cause that have been filed by the adult probation and parole. That I could give you the numbers of cases that have been filed in the juvenile court by the Department of Child and Family Services or the delinquency filings. And you could get a look at just a total workload. What I can't tell you is what we've accomplished. And maybe, I can't tell you, well, I could extrapolate how many times defendant A has come back in front of the court and tell you, as regards that particular person, we're apparently failing. Or defendant B maybe came once and didn't come again, and I can't tell you precisely why that's occurred. And perhaps having people on board like social workers who can get people into the programs, and we can see an actual comparison by those that we have helped along the way, as opposed to those that we haven't helped. Maybe we can have some statistics that show progress. Does that answer your question?
It does. I mean, it's something that I would expect to look at. It's something that I would expect in this meeting. And this goes to, this is an interesting dynamic with the public defenders, that we have a contractual relationship between the county and the Public Defenders Association. And yet, at times, the dynamic has seemed as though it was more of a departmental relationship. And that's kind of a no man's land. That's a bad scenario, in my opinion. And I am a proponent for additional clarification and some restructuring of how this engagement has worked to clarify that it is a contractual relationship, or to go full steam and move it the other way. But I think having it in this kind of middle ground has led to some ambiguity. And I'm just talking about matters of administration. I don't think that affects the representation that anyone in our community is receiving, right? And on that front, I think that your team has received a lot of accolades for the type of representation that you receive. But from the administration side and the finance side, I think it's time to maybe take a fresh look at how this contract is set up. And that's my opinion. I think that
Okay.
Looking at the directors, the slate of directors on this nonprofit association, how the contract is managed, how conflicts of interest work, all of this. I think it's time to look, because this conversation that you just are having with us kind of looks like a conversation that our departments are having with us, except for you're not in all of our department head meetings, and so you don't come with all of the data that we've asked every other department head to come with. And the contract that we have had historically does not demand all of that data that I'm asking for from you. So I think that there's an opportunity to just make sure that we set expectations in the right way with the new contract.
Tom, what would you think of this being a department?
There is contemplated in the statute that, that counties can set up a department of a public defender, a department of the county. The obvious concern from my point of view would be to make certain that no one in your position or the county attorney's position is directing what we do. I think it can be done. To answer your concerns directly, the one good thing that I've done over the past 20 years is kept excellent statistics. No one's asked for them. Anytime you want to come over, I have statistics from 2000, caseloads, expenditures, funding, all laid out, and it helps me to project and to be prepared for the next year, knowing what we've done in the past. So it's been a self-serving effort, but I think it would address the concerns you have retrospectively. Going forward, I think your point's well taken. I think if there were more communication, even if I didn't become, or our office didn't become a department of the county, if we were invited to come over or expected to come over more routinely, I would welcome that. I would welcome having each one of you know a lot more about what we do. There's no reason not to have you fully involved, to the administrative extent, and understand how we do what we do.
And having had the opportunity to spend 45 minutes with Tom, his data is very interesting. He's tracked population growth, the number of felony cases, you know, where those are broken down, the types of felonies. It was incredibly informative to me to see the increased workload that his office has taken on, particularly in the last 10 years, I would say.
I would think.
5 years especially, at an exceptional rate. And for me, I think the biggest eye-opener with what I saw from Tom's data that he had was how quickly the requirements on his office have outpaced growth. In particular, the number of cases he's having to defend are far exceeding the population growth.
And I would add that that load is shared by the county attorney.
It is, and I think that's why we saw the 15 new attorneys from the county attorney, right? And if we're looking at your 7 attorney ads, that's roughly 80%, 85% comparison to the county attorney. And based on what we went through with your numbers, I think you end up tasked with defending about 80 to 85% of the stuff that the county attorney
Ever
prosecutes.
since 2008, you stayed right at about 85%, hovering above or below it, less than a percentage point since the Great Recession. I'd like to say that we're your leading indicators. Ours, county attorney and my caseload, as it goes up, you can see population coming up behind it. But we're growing at about twice the rate. We have grown at about twice the rate that the county population has grown. And again, I have those statistics, Commissioner, and I'd invite you over and we can go through them. Or I can send them over to you to look at it on your own. Nothing.
I'm also
Right.
interested in the this concept. I wish we had our county attorney here in this meeting for. You're saying that I understand we certainly would not want the county attorney involved in a department scenario in any way with your department, but is it really an issue for the legislative body to have oversight I mean, there's no way it can be a department without that. And
No, to the extent of what am I doing with the money you're giving me? Heavens, no. You should have oversight on that. And am I hiring the proper amount of people? Am I servicing the community that I'm tasked to service and that you're paying for? Certainly, I have no problem with that kind of oversight. The only oversight I don't want is I don't want you doing this in this case. I don't want you employing this expert in this case. I don't want you to investigate this aspect of this case. That's intuitive, I'm sure.
that's interesting, because we don't deal with that dynamic with our other law enforcement issues
we don't.
because they're independently elected officials who oversee those departments.
Could we talk a little bit about the financial manager? That I'm hearing that it is a request that the commission feels is appropriate. Am I hearing that right?
I believe it's appropriate.
As one way of.
I certainly think it is. I mean, your department's grown to a point where I think it's appropriate.
And I don't have any problem with that at all either. And I think it is best, as I said earlier, that there be more than one or two sets of eyes on that amount of money that we're entrusted with, of the public's money. And that we're efficient and accountable.
Can I state it? I'll state it a little bit more strongly
Sure.
than you might have just done. Having another set of eyes is dramatically understates what I think should happen to. I mean, now the budget that we're talking about here is bigger than every department except for our sheriff's department and our county attorney's department, right? And all of our other departments are subject to a full audit. They have the full purchasing approvals, full transparency of everything in the financials, and that's what gives taxpayers comfort. And so that is not a statement at all of that there really has been issues retrospectively. It's just a simple, like when you say another set of eyes, I feel like that's one of the reasons why I think it's appropriate, is I think it needs to be a significant level of accountability, transparency, access, even audit, so that now that the dollars that are being spent in this contract are so significant.
Well, I'm fully on board with that. I have no problems whatsoever.
So I've got a little different perspective. In our current contract, I believe it states, and you can correct me if I'm wrong or somebody else might know about it, that there's a financial report on a quarterly basis that comes to the county. And in an email, I was asking you, to go back and give me those financial reports, which I'm not seeing. That's the reason why I'm asking for those financial reports. And the finances is a big part. Financial manager would be fantastic. But if we don't get the reports, what's good as a financial manager it's something on a contract basis we should be getting anyway. So I'm just kind of concerned about what we're trying to accomplish if we're not accomplishing it now.
I may be wrong, but I think the contract contemplates giving you reports of caseloads and so forth. Not that it shouldn't be a financial report quarterly, but I'm not sure it specifically says that in the contract, and I may be wrong.
I believe it says financial statements,
All
but
right.
we can go back and look
And
and make sure.
And your point's well taken. I have them. I have not traditionally provided them to the county, and to Commissioner Ainge's point, maybe there should be restructuring and more rigid method of reporting, and I have no problem with that.
Because it's easier for me. I mean, again, I've asked for them, and you said, come over and you can see whatever, basically. And I'd like to have them. I'd like to see kind of the history of them, where they went, what was spent.
Okay.
That's what financial statements are for. It gives me a lot more comfort than to just, looking and saying, well, it's a snapshot in time. This gives me a little more.
There is a requirement for there to be an accountant already. And
An outside accountant, I believe.
But I mean, so what it says in the record section is that the association agrees that by the end of the month following the end of each calendar quarter, it will provide to the county and to the Utah County Auditor financial records related to the preceding quarter from its accountant, to include a balance sheet and income and expense records. So, I would agree, that's just a simple, that's something that should be part of this. It's in there now, but we just need to make sure that happens.
I think, Tom, from my perspective, one of the reasons there's maybe been a slip on this, or it's just not materialized, is I think about Explore Utah Valley, I think about Wasatch Mental Health. They're kind of these quasi-departments that we have, but we are on their board, right? In Wasatch Mental Health's case, we are the authority board. And so we're in a meeting with them monthly or quarterly to where it's really easy to exchange that type of information. And so I think that, you know, as we're talking about this holistically, I think that's maybe one of the mechanisms that's made it easier for those entities which have a similar type of relationship as yours does to us, where we contractually fund them money. They're kind of a department, but they're really not. That, for me, has made it easier to keep track of what's happening there, is just because we have that regularly scheduled meeting with them to where we go over all of that. And so that might be something that we think about, if
I've got two responses to that.
that helps.
In my position as the public defender, I'm in an adversarial position to the county attorney. And it, again, you use the word holistically. That's been sort of the stance that we've had, not with the commission, but to maintain the fact that we are operating independently and not being influenced, and that we can continue to operate independently, number one. Number two, Commissioner Ivey, you and I have spoken about wanting one of the members of the commission to be on our board of directors and to meet with us quarterly for that very reason. And we've asked Commissioner Ivey to pass that ask on to you two. If one of you would like to be on our board, we'd be more than happy to have you on our board for that reason. And if it's your desire, if you want me to start coming to me or a representative of my office to come to your monthly meetings, departmental meetings, I'm happy to do that. All of it's doable. I'm not resisting any of it.
Well, without looking at it in depth, I think the contractual relationship is the best, but
I prefer
maybe with
it.
more information, it could be a little different, but still, just at the outset of it, I think that would be that's the best. And if we hold to that, maybe some restructuring and some understanding of what that looks like, and that way we keep cleaner lines as I see it. But I'm not adverse to at least looking at it, but still, I think that just from my first impression, that seems to be the best, just historically and what else, I've seen.
And that's the only model we have in this state presently.
Right.
Is the contractual basis. Again, I'd invite any of you over, and particularly Commissioner Ainge, because you haven't been over yet, and we could sit. There's so much data on my computer that it's hard for me to bring or to memorize, but all of it's open, and
It's just down the hall now, right? Well, I guess down the stairs.
you will be. You will be.
Down the stairs in the
You'll be
hall.
down the stairway. Yeah. So,
Our excuse for not showing up has waned.
yeah, it has. We're closer and closer.
And one of your attorneys is right next door now, I believe.
Right.
I think he's
Well, a couple of them on both sides.
yeah, we're surrounded.
Well, that's my ask. I understand the significance of it. I'm appreciative. I like to say this every time that I meet with you, that there are only 2 public defenders' offices in the state. Our office has existed since 1993, so that's 25 plus years of this commission recognizing and funding a better way to provide the service that we provide. All other counties in the state do it on a contract, one attorney to the county each. And I believe we provide much better service.
We do.
Can I just ask to walk down through this for me so I just fully understand? Not looking at the expense side, but looking at the projected funding side. The Utah County, that 2018, that's kind of the starting that you're going off of, this 4,781,584, right? That number is,
I'm not looking at the same number, Commissioner. Help
Oh,
me with that.
I got,
Are we looking at the same table, the
I've got this one.
expense? Okay,
So I'm going to the projected funding.
Okay.
Skip the expense part of it.
got
And
it.
go to the funding. So the Utah County 2018-851,
Yes,
that's 4,781,584.
yes.
And you came to that number because that's the number in 2018. Is that how you came to that number? Is that,
Well, it was entered into in 2018, but it funded 2019.
okay, very good, thank you. Let me just make sure.
And the next number under that is that the number that you approved for some salary increases to match the salary increases to the other county employees.
We had some conversation on that, okay.
So the total amount that your county has funded us in 2019 was 4,925,362.50. Does that make sense?
Right.
Okay.
Okay. And then, what's this IDC, this 2018, 139, and it goes all the way across to a column, 6,856,332? What's that?
Thank you. Those three contractual numbers are contracts that you have entered into with the Indigent Defense Commission. They have increased the fund, they had an initial funding and increased it 2 times. They're now paying $438,300 per quarter. And they've obligated themselves to pay that through the 30th of June of next year for a total of $1,753,000. Are you with me, Commissioner?
1,753, got that?
Yes. And I juxtaposed those numbers. It looks better on a screen than it does on a printout. But their total funding, along with some funding that comes to us through Juab County, which I'll explain if anybody wants to ask further, comes to a total of $1,930,000.
Oh, I see, okay. I see.
And those combined with what the county pays
Combined.
independently comes to $6,856,000.
I'm just not used to seeing the total at the top, I guess. Okay. And then you got the total of all of that down below, which is that
Yes.
that 6,856,000.
Did it in a different way to break
Yeah,
it up,
okay.
mainly for my benefit. And the very bottom funding, bottom line, is the amount of what I would consider to be the deficit for what I'm asking for 2020.
And that's the difference between your projected expenses and your,
Right, and that's what I would ask the county to increase my budget by. And that would meet the expenses that I note above. I should add one thing there on the line of expenses, on the line of vendors. You can see that I have a round number there of 400,000 in italics, and I did that on purpose without breaking it down between the two functions of my office, simply because over the years, that percentage of roughly somewhere between 4 and 5% per year is spent on vendors, and I felt it was a better way to achieve what I could project the future to be on those costs than than any other method.
and then you
So-
took the 7 attorneys, 2 support, 2 social workers, and a financial manager, and that's all rolled into the
Yes,
into the pay, so it's all in there. It's not-
Yes.
not case
Yes.
separate.
that is projection for 2020 with these additional 12 salaried positions that we spoke of.
And then, on your overhead, just define to me what's in your overhead and what would be that 7.33% increase?
We have rent, we have dues and prescriptions. In this day and age, we prescribe to services, file management systems. We pay dues for all attorneys. We pay the county rent. We have office expenses, miscellaneous
Yeah.
office expenses anymore, very little paper expenses, very little postage, but just the costs of operating the office internally, as opposed to, I call vendors, employing experts, investigators, consultants of any type that are people from outside of the office. Let me speak to that just a bit. And I've said this before, but I think it bears repeating. We have traditionally, over the years, contracted with independent private investigators to do our investigations. And I think that this year, I think we're close to about $180,000 on investigators, I believe. That's by memory. That would buy one full-time investigator with a salary, maybe 1.5 investigators with a salary and benefits. We think we get more bang for the buck, more efficiency by not employing an in-house investigator and by subcontracting out on an as-needed basis. We get a broader base of knowledge. We have more people available to service our people's needs. If there were only 1 or 1.5 investigators in our office, they could never keep up with our workload. So I think that's a better way of handling what we do, and that's why we have some extended vendor costs, which would otherwise be salaried employees, and that would probably require 4 or 5 of them. So I think we achieve a good savings there.
Okay. Would you do one more thing for me on the attorneys, support staff, social
Sure.
work, and the financial manager? Would you break those out in the sense of, you know, what their payroll is, what their benefits on all of them all the way through? I don't know, I mean, are you starting them at a midpoint or at the base, or, you know, where?
If
where
you
that's-
just allow me to get back to my office, I'll copy all of those and
Okay.
send them to each of you.
All right.
The proposed costs of each of those.
You know,
Well,
Tom, you can
yeah.
just send an email with this spreadsheet to us.
Okay? All right. My proposed 2020 spreadsheet, which would include not only those 5 salaries, but all salaries and all costs within the office, all, yeah,
That'd be awesome.
not a problem.
Thank you, Tom.
Anything else? Anything else, Tom?
Only to answer your questions.
Thank you.
I have a question. So
Sure.
space, you mentioned space. Have you begun looking for potential office space?
We're hoping to take as much of that building as we can,
Of which building?
the one we're in. Let's see, 12 more people, yeah.
So, sorry, and let me clarify. Not just for the new attorneys. I think that as we, it's my opinion that as we continue to burst at the seams here and not have any space for our core functions, that any function that's on a contractual basis or not a core county department function is a candidate to say, hey, can you find some space on the open market?
To answer you directly, no, we haven't looked. We love that building. You will too, once you start coming into it on a daily basis. I met Commissioner Lee the other day. When I walked down that hallway and looked down at the tiles and how tightly they fit and how beautiful everything is, that's the most beautiful building in Provo. Our preference would be to stay there, obviously, and expand within that building. But if I'm hearing you correctly, then we'll start looking.
Yeah, I mean, I am sensitive to what the needs are. I'm sensitive to, you know, we've talked that some of our departments don't need to be in Provo. They could be anywhere. There's one department that may need to be in Spanish Fork. I think that your attorneys need to be in the courthouse.
Yeah.
Right, and so I think that
I think that,
proximity to the courthouse is a priority for your office.
Luckily, the Utah County campus is close to the courthouse, so it's served us beautifully. Most of our attorneys walked to the courthouse. So, you know, that is a nice location for us on many, many levels. I am just not attuned to any, I don't even know what office space goes for or what's available. I haven't had a need to look.
Okay.
But if you're telling me I need to start thinking in that direction, I will.
Well, we'll continue those conversations. I just know
Right.
that our actual county office building is in high demand with, you know, a waiting list, a few deep, of
Okay.
departments that want any space that becomes available.
All right.
So,
Let me leave with two things. Each of you three is invited over anytime. Come on over. I will share my proposal for my budget for 2020, but there are many other items of interest, as Commissioner Ivy has said, that I've kept over the years that help inform me in what I'm doing and why, you know, what I need to ask of you. And anytime you want to come over, that's fine. Now it's such a short trip, just come on down.
and one comment I would make to that is that's kind of what this process is for, and this contract renewal process,
Mhm.
is I would say, you know, I would ask you to go and kind of aggregate the data that you think is most relevant and the business case that's most relevant, and put that together in a spreadsheet or a presentation and get it in front of us. I think that would be the best way to make sure that we have the information you feel like we need to make the right decision for your department.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
All right. Closing the work session. You can go ahead and turn it off. I don't think we need a motion or